All right, well, it's 7 o'clock. Hello, everybody. We welcome you to Creamed Honey. And we ask that if you have questions, feel free to type them into the chat box, and I will filter those to Mark. And Mark, if you want to go ahead and take over the screen.
Absolutely. I will share my screen. Maybe I will.
There you go.
The beginning. Okay. This is one that you're probably going to regret of all the workshops that we can't do this live. Because I've already ate 2 of the test pieces of toast that I took photos of. And I can tell you, you would love it. But maybe we can redo this again, and I'll have some other flavors. So, hopefully everybody had honey. I've talked to some beekeepers that still have honey, and you try to sell it. So there's different forms to sell honey. We know that extracted is probably what most of us do, but then there are some folks that don't necessarily like the extracted or liquid honey. Other than for cough syrup, I hate to say this, I don't enjoy the liquid honey as much as the others. Um, for whatever reason, my wife calls me weird for many reasons. That's probably one of them. Um, so it's another product line, and I think this one gives you so much leverage. There's so many different things that you can do with creamed honey that you can't do with anything else, as far as flavors, fruits that you can add to it. Um, your imagination is the only thing that limits you to what you can do with it. So this is a bottle of honey that I poured out of the bucket that I used for the creaming process that we see in tonight's class. It, in fact, was sourwood honey. I wasn't real smart in using that bucket, but that's the one I had put in to warm, and so that's the one that got used. Typically, you don't use your lightest grade of honey, but that's what happened on this one. So, sounds great, and you go to some of the bee suppliers' websites, and I'm not going to name names, but you'll see with their creamed honey, they will have syrups that are chocolate flavored or strawberry flavored. And then when you look on the ingredient list, it's like, okay, that's imitation. The whole purpose of eating honey is because it's natural and health benefits. So you can do so many things with adding things to honey. The one problem you have, honey is very dense, right? So if you try to mix whatever you want to chop and add to it, it's going to come to the top. And then you're constantly fighting it, stir it. Or if you're infusing honey, that's the other problem. If you infuse honey, a lot of it doesn't disperse well, and so then you're constantly having to stir it, shake it, whatever. I pulled these 2 photos off the internet. I won't say from what site. These 2 photos was impressed by the product that they had. But just looking at both of those, I'm thinking if I put a spoon in there, the taste that I would get from one spoon to the next wouldn't be consistent. You can see some of it on the right has settled to the bottom, some of it's in suspension, some of it's at the top, and the same thing on the left. So,
Hey, Mark.
yes,
Is that noise on your end?
not on my end. I'm by myself. But I
Okay.
hear it. Yes, I can
Yeah.
hear it.
Yeah. Let me see. Oh, here we go. Okay. I found it. Thank you.
Okay. So I've had some friends that gave us some hot pepper infused honey last year. We really enjoyed it. And hey, if you're on the call, thanks. We could always use it again. But they had to go through a lot of heating process in order to get it infused. And most people want to have that natural benefits of the honey. So you'll see in the photos here at the beginning and at the end, you can use some of your darker honeys if you make creamed honey, because during the creaming process, it gets lighter. So if you start with an amber color, it'll be a light amber once it goes through the creaming process. That way you can save your lighter honeys for sale, because for whatever reason, most people will generally pay more for the lighter color of honey. So this is a good way to use some of that mid to late season honey that's a little darker. This I just set on top of the hive. I'll show you the same photo in reverse at the end, and you'll see the color differences aren't quite as good. This stuff is so thick the sun didn't shine through it, but everything started the same color as that bottle on the left. That's what I used, 2-pound pail that I had of it. So the one just to the right of that is just plain creamed honey. You notice how light it is. The one to the right of that is elderberry creamed honey. And the very far right is cinnamon creamed honey. And that's just, that's the list could go on and on and on, as long as you understand the process of how you cream it and how you get it in suspension. And then you have to take into account, one of the big things we'll see is the moisture content of anything you put in honey. Because if you're not really careful, you can cause fermentation to start, even in creamed honey. And then, of course, once it starts, your product has lost its value. So at the top of the billboard is the dice method. That's what most of the big commercial creamed honey people use, as the dice method, and that was developed by Professor Dice while he was working at Cornell University, and he actually patented it in 1928. So rather than going through this long, drawn-out chemistry lesson, it's safe to say that if you can get sugar crystals of a consistent size, then they will replicate at certain temperatures, and all of the sugar crystals will be the same size. And that's what you're shooting for. We know honey crystallizes naturally, and this is a way of having a product that you put into the crystallized form to start with, and then you don't have to worry about having a warming cabinet to reliquefy some of your honey if it's December or January and you're still selling to your customers, or storing it in a warm room. The dice method requires it to be pasteurized, so it has to be at least 120 degrees Fahrenheit and then strained. The reason that they want the temperature so high, as the honey crystallizes, the moisture content will come up a little bit. So they want to kill all of the yeast in that honey base to make sure that they don't have fermentation occurring later. There's other ways to deal with that, but that axiom stays true. So you have to take into account, you just can't say, oh, well, this 5-gallon bucket's turning to crystals already. I'll just make crystallized honey. I'll make creamed honey out of it. You need to know your percentage of moisture before you start the process. So you need a starter, creamed honey, kind of like, what is it, sourdough bread. You have to have a starter, and you basically just keep using it, save a little bit of starter, and go again. And that's exactly what happens when you're doing the creaming process. You save a little bit of whatever is the best flavor, whatever. So how do you decide? And I'll show you in a minute. I just bought as many different varieties of creamed honey until I found one. I'm not looking for flavor here. I'm looking for texture, consistency, how small the crystals are. So when I found one that I liked, I bought a couple of pounds and then the rest is tonight's story. So if we wanted to, we could say we add 1 to 10, an equal part of creamed honey, already creamed honey, to 10 parts of liquid honey. So if I had 1 pound of starter, I could add it to 10 pounds of honey, or around a gallon of honey, and that would cream. I'd want to stir it several times over a couple of days, put it in my containers, and then hold it around 55 degrees, and it should set in about 5 to 7 days. So I could say, hey, that's the end of the presentation. Thanks for coming, but you wouldn't be happy. So we want to look at the pictures and then describe how we can have quality creamed honey without heating it to a temperature that's going to damage the beneficials that's already in it. So the raw method, just as the name implies, only differs in that we're not pasteurizing it, right? We're going to warm it. I want to make sure that most of my sugar crystals are melted, dissolved. But if I go 108 or above, I'm starting to damage those natural enzymes or the beneficials that most of us want or expect from raw honey. So I don't really want to do that. I can't say then I have raw creamed honey, because I've taken the heat above a level that is going to allow that to have all the beneficials. If you float around 98 to 100 degrees, or as long as you were under 108 and you knew you were consistently under 108 and you could stay under that, you'd be okay. The thing is, you don't want to, most of these things will fluctuate 2 or 3 degrees. So if I set it at 105 or 106, I'd worry that it's going to bump on me in the middle of the night, and I probably have damaged it. I probably couldn't tell the difference in the taste, but I think it's just a quality thing. You want to know that the customers that you're selling this to that expect beneficial raw honey, that you give it to them even in this form.
Hey, Mark.
Technically, yes.
Peggy wants to know, how long do you hold that temperature of 120 degrees?
Now, if you're doing the dice method, as long as you get it to 120 degrees, you've killed the enzyme, the yeast. So if you did that, I would think if you held that 4 or 5 hours, you're good. That's the temperature that you've killed the yeast at, that wild yeast or the natural yeast that's in there. I do it, so there's different ways to do it. And technically, if you read the literature, it says you may have slightly larger granules on your creamed honey if you don't get it that hot. I haven't been able to tell any difference in the texture. Now, I will if some of the stuff I incorporate for flavor, obviously, if those granules are fairly big, you know, that I'll taste. But the actual pure creamed honey only, I can't tell any difference in the texture. So I think it's the amount of time you leave it. So I let mine run right around 98 to 100 for about 4 days, because I'm not worried about getting it close to the damage point. I'm safe holding it. That's just slightly above what the inside of the hive is going to keep it at. The problem is I have to make sure that I use honey that's around 17% moisture or less. Because remember, if I haven't killed that yeast, it's going to rise a little bit. The water content's going to rise a little during this process, and I could have it ferment, right? If I get too high, 18.6 is our ideal moisture content. And if I get it above that, I'm toast. I'm going to have a problem. And sometimes even in that 18.6 range, you can have fermentation, especially when you're crystallizing it. So if you're going to do the raw method, you're going to have to try and get your honey down around 17%. I think the literature that I've read said at 17% and below, you don't have to worry about fermentation at all. So that's the good thing. So that's what we're going to do. And there's various ways if your honey's a little too moist. I think most of us can put our buckets or whatever in a small room with a dehumidifier, let it run several days, stir it a few times a day, and pull down a couple percentage points over 4 or 5 days. So here's just, there are, of course, commercial. At work, we bought a $8,000 honey dryer that will dry 600 pounds, 4 percentage points in 8 hours. But who of us can afford that? So this is, the one on the right is a homemade warming cabinet. That works if you're wanting to get your temperature up. I think yet that one probably has a couple of light bulbs in it and a thermostat so you can regulate the heat. You're not wanting to go over, say, about 100. To be on the safe side, let's stay away from 108. Let's say we don't want to get above 104. And on the left is what I used. That also happens to be my queen rearing incubator, but when it's not in use, it'll hold 2 gallons of honey, and it will hold temperatures to 1/10 of a degree. So if I put it on 98.9, it won't fluctuate more than 1/10 of a degree. I'll leave that for 4 days. I'm busy. I know it's not going to get warmer than that. That one I know won't. And then I can feel safe that I've gotten all the sugar crystals melted as much as possible. Other than that, the process after that is identical, dice and not. The only difference is 2 things: the temperature that you take it up to, and if you don't take it up to the 108, you're being able to account for a lower moisture content, so you don't have a fermentation problem. You're still going to add 1 part starter to 10 parts honey, so about 1 pound of creamed honey to a gallon of liquid honey. Mix that several times in a 24 to 48 hour period. We'll go over that in a little more detail. And then prior to pouring it into your container, you add your flavors, your fruits. Leave it as plain creamed honey if that's what you want to do. Anything, though, that you add needs to be folded, stirred in well right before you pour it, because it won't move once you've put it in there. It's going to solidify, but it won't incorporate any better. So you'll have pockets that you'll notice probably just by the color when you're removing the product, if you didn't get it incorporated well. The key when you're adding anything or stirring this is to go so slow that it infuriates you how slow you're having to go. You stir it, you fold it. You don't want to pull air into this mixture at all. There's a huge difference between creamed honey and whipped honey. Whipped honey is very light. Creamed honey is very dense. So we're talking about creamed honey here. And then you have to put it at a temperature of around 55 degrees. That's pretty important. That can fluctuate maybe 3 or 4 degrees each way without a problem. But it needs to be fairly close to that. In about a week, your honey should be set. Now, it might need to go a little longer if you put a little less than 1-to-10 ratio, but pretty much about a week at that temperature, and you're going to have it set. So let's just do some pictures. Garfield's going to accompany us here as we're making this. I had a big stainless steel pot. I dumped my 2-gallon bucket of liquid honey in there. I'll say this, right? It was at 98 degrees. This set for a day before I poured it in there. You don't want that warm honey to have the starter put into it because it'll just melt and you'll be unsuccessful. You need to have it about 70 degrees when you add your starter. So I put it in my stainless steel pot. That's 2 gallons, roughly 20 pounds, right? I know it's actually more than 20 for all you that are really spot on your calculations. It is more than 20 pounds, but this is an approximate. It will still, 2 pounds of starter will handle 2 gallons of honey. I cut the labels off. I'm not advertising for anybody. This was what I finally found after buying 4 or 5 different brands of the consistency and size of crystals that I liked. So there you go. So my 2 1-pound tubs, So I just started adding it to it with a spoon. You want to scoop it out. You don't want to try and put it into big clumps because you're going to have to fold and gently stir this until all that breaks apart and is incorporated in your honey. So the larger pieces that you put in there, the more difficult it's going to be for you to get that incorporated well. If it doesn't incorporate well, you're going to have problems with the creaming process. So there's my 2 1-pound containers individually spooned out, and then the fun begins. So I opted for a stainless steel mixer on the end of a drill, and even with that, it was rather monotonous. I tried to stir this for about 10 minutes at a time. So the first day, I did that every hour for 3 or 4 hours till most of it was incorporated. And then I did it like 3 more times that day, and then 4 times on day 2. And it was incorporated well enough I didn't need to do anymore. But don't, if you're using a drill, it has to be a variable speed and it has to be slow. As slow as you can pull the trigger to where it's just barely moving the paddle. So we're going to do that. Again, we don't want our base, the honey that we warmed, we want it to cool off to about 70. I don't like to use plastic containers to do this in for a number of reasons. If I'm using a mixer, I don't want little pieces of plastic off the side of the bucket getting in there. And stainless is kind of the industry standard for food. So this stainless pot and a stainless mixer attachment that I use. You can do it by hand. I tried it, and you will look like SpongeBob after several years, but you're going to be really tired and decide you need a drill. So with that in mind, now I think when you start adding flavors, if you want to do that you probably need to do by hand. But this initial part, to get that broke up, you need to keep agitating it, and some kind of equipment is advisable. You're going to start to see it change color, and that you can tell that your creamed honey starting to get incorporated pretty well in your batch. And you want an even color before you pour this. If you don't have an even color, it's not going to set well. You see streaks, clear streaks, and then the creamier color in there, you're going to have to keep mixing it. You're especially going to after day 2, you're going to have to make sure it's perfect before you do anything else, or you're going to be very disappointed. They make equipment that you can do this on a large scale, so you can do like 16 gallons at a time. You can do up to about 30 gallons at a time. Most of it is going to use an attachment that you would set on a jacketed bottling tank, if you guys know what that is. And it's a motor that sits on top with kind of like big paddles in it that turn very slowly, like you're mixing ice cream with an old ice cream maker. And some of them are programmable, some of them aren't. Some of them will come on and run 15 minutes every hour, and then others just come on and run, and you manually turn them on and off during that process. But they operate the same. You're probably looking on the low end if you want to get into that part. You're going to drop $1,200 on the low end, and then probably up to $7,000 or $8,000 for one of the big ones. So if you're just starting off, the pot in the kitchen works pretty well. Especially, I'll say this, don't make big batches when you're mixing flavors in, because some of those flavors tend to intensify from when you first mix it in until a week later. And I'll tell you more about that in a few slides. So this is what I had used. On the left is freeze-dried elderberry. Got that from a gentleman out in Missouri, Daryl Clausen. Beautiful product, comes in a little packet already freeze-dried in a powdered form. and this may be wrong. If anybody wants to know, I'll find that website address. But I think he's Lost Farm MO for Missouri, lostfarmmo.com. So I got that in. That was my elderberry base. And then I used cinnamon just because I was making it and I like cinnamon. So you get to kind of dictate what flavors you use. How much should you put in there? Let's say this. You can always add more. Once you've dumped it in the creamed honey, you can't take it out. Fairly easy to figure the elderberry out because the packet that I got it in had the directions to make a pound. So I could pretty well figure that that packet would make that much creamed honey. The cinnamon, I kind of shot for 2 different batches, what I thought was good and what I thought was a little weak. Turned out weak was strong enough in the end. What container? Basically 2 containers that you're going to use in creamed honey, and that's the little plastic tub the suppliers sell. And you're going to have a label that you put on there, a sticker on the top, or the glass jars. The glass jars on the right. I think this photo I pulled from Better Bee. If you exhibit, if you want to enter in the honey competition at the WVBA fall conferences, you're going to need a glass jar with straight sides, and that's what they look like. If you're trying to buy that, here's the kicker. You have to remember these containers when you purchase them. If you purchase them from someone other than a bee supply place, you have to calculate the difference in weight. That's actually a 12-ounce jar. So a 12-ounce jar for liquid will hold 16 ounces by weight of creamed honey. And then, you know, you can put your label on there. I happen to like the glass just because if I'm doing different flavors, it's really neat to set them side by side because then people ask you questions. If you've got a table of honey out for sale and it's all liquid honey, they pretty much know what that is and they kind of know what it tastes like. They may ask to taste it. If you've got it in a tub, creamed honey, well, they've never heard of creamed honey. Well, what's it look like and what does it taste like? You could have 1 container open, I guess, to let them taste it in a sanitary fashion, but you can't let them see the difference in colors. Again, we're wanting to keep that after we've poured it around 55 degrees. Some people have a basement that will be cool this time of year that they can set it in, or a garage, corner of your garage, or something. And about a week later, it should have set. Shouldn't take more than 10 days. If it's taken more than 10 days, something wasn't right. You put your starter into the honey that was too warm. You put way too little honey for the way too little starter for the amount of honey that you used. So that probably will set. It'll just take longer, and you may not be satisfied with the results. But it shouldn't be more than 10 days. If you keep around that temperature, within 10 days, you should have it. This is what I use. I got it off Marketplace, right? You can buy everything off Facebook Marketplace. So I got this a few years ago. Somebody had a wine cooler that they didn't like, and I can't remember. It worked. I can't remember why they didn't like it, and I got it for $25. And my idea was I'm going to make creamed honey in it. And it says 57 degrees. This thing flashes between 57, 56, 55. So it worked great. That 2-degree variance didn't make any difference. And I think I can put 2 dozen 1-pound jars in there. 7 days in there, it's set. If you're able to control the temperature that correctly, you're going to have an excellent product in 7 days. Maybe a little sooner. I didn't really check it sooner. It might have been okay in 5 days, but I just waited 7 days and it was firm. So now this is that one photo we looked at with the sun on the back side. You couldn't see it, but on the sun hitting those jars, you can definitely see a color difference in that. And that alone, setting on your table at the farmer's market, is going to pull customers in and they're going to have questions. Now, you can't have that on the table and at 80 degrees outside because you're not going to have creamed honey very long. But if it's cooler, you will be able to elicit some more customers by using that. Cinnamon on the left, elderberry to the right, just creamed honey to the right of that, and then on the right, the far right, is the bottle with the color of honey that all those was made from. And then this is with the lids screwed off. Now, if you'll start off looking in the bottom, just the pure honey, you notice how smooth it is on the top. 2 bubbles. And I really wasn't trying to prepare this for competition. So if any of the other judges from the WVBA show is on this, that wasn't the intent. It was content. But I will say that when you start adding items to that, you can see that you got more bubbles in the top. And I guess that's just because it slowed the release of any air coming up during the setting process. The larger the material, the cinnamon is on the top, the brown. On the right is the elderberry crystals, and they had the biggest bubbles on the top. And the process was the exact same for all of those. How are you going to store it? It really should be stored at 65 or cooler to maintain the texture. If you have access to an old refrigerator in your garage, in your basement, that would be the even better way of storing it. It will stay really firm. You don't have to worry about rotating it. Gets above 65, it'll soften. And if it gets much above 70, you'll start to see it separate. And especially, it'll be real noticeable in a glass jar. You'll start to get different colors. You'll notice rings that look like it's going back to a liquid form. And it does go back to kind of a partial liquid. It doesn't completely liquefy. But generally, it starts in the bottom of the jar and goes up. So that color will change first. And it just continues to creep up the jar. You can't reverse the process. You can't put it back at 55 degrees and it recrystallize. You're still going to have separated layers. Sellability at that point, you can consume it, but you're not going to be able to sell it, especially in glass jars. It's going to be too noticeable. You wouldn't want to do that anyway. When you get done, remember to keep starter. If you're going to mix something in it, before you mix anything in it, pour you some starter so you don't have to go out and buy more. It's going to replicate exactly what you bought. So I reused those 2 plastic tubs that I bought my starter in, filled them back full with my plain creamed honey mixture, and they have set. Now I'll have it again. And if you wanted to make more, you just save more. You were going to make a larger batch. And you'll need to store it same way. You need to keep that below 65 degrees. If you've only got a little bit, just throw it into your refrigerator. Just remember not to eat it all before you use it, or you're going to have to go out and buy it. It's a little more. Those were 1 pound tubs. I think I paid $10 a pound for each of those tubs. So it's a little more than some of the liquid honey, but not some liquid honey is still $10 a pound. So not more. And I tried several varieties before I found the one that I liked. Price had nothing to do with it. I was looking for the texture and how fine the crystals were. What about sales? You've spent a lot more time doing this than you would have if you would have just warmed it up, strained it, and put it in bottles. You've got a lot more labor in here. So you should be asking more. And if you have to explain it to your customer, explain the process to them. You don't want to underprice yourself. If you're trying to make money at this, you're going to have to, just like any other business venture, you're going to have to know what you input into it in product and labor, and then price it accordingly. I keep hearing some beekeepers say that it's a hobby that they just lose, enormous amounts of money. And there are years when there's problems, that are unforeseen or out of your control, just like anything else in the agricultural world. But you should be, hey, if you're not breaking even or making money, we need to sit down when we have a face-to-face conference, and we need to talk, else there's money to be made in this. And when you do your flavors, right, you have to calculate that. Cinnamon is a whole lot cheaper than freeze-dried elderberry or strawberry or blue, whatever you're doing. Know the price, be able to break it down, the amount you use and what you paid for it, so you know that you're selling your product for an appropriate amount.
Hey, Mark, we've got a question.
Yes.
Phyllis asks, can you use dehydrated fruit?
You can. Now, there's going to be a little bit of moisture in dehydrated, right? Not much, but there's a little bit in there. So I'd want to make sure that my honey was definitely 17%, or if I could get it a little drier. And the other thing is, unless you ground that pretty fine, it may be inconsistent by the scoop, whether it's a spoon or butter knife or whatever. You may have more in one scoop than the other. The nice thing about using powder, and yeah, I bought a freeze dryer. My wife is not on this class. Promise you won't tell her. It's like $2,300. She likes what comes out of it, and that allows you to take anything and freeze dry it and grind it into a powder, and it's real easy to incorporate in this. But you could use dried or dehydrated. I'd want it really dry, and I'd want to try and control my moisture on my creamed honey end a little more, and it'd be good. I mean, I could imagine, dried apple, and that would be good in creamed honey. This was a piece of toast in the toaster, because this is one of the pluses. I'm not a person, if I eat liquid honey on bread, maybe it's me, maybe it's the way I put it on there, stuff gets gummy, right? And I don't enjoy it that way. This is thick enough to where it'll pretty well hold its consistency. This was a piece of toast. You can see it just had started to turn brown. I popped it out of the toaster, put a swipe of each of the three on there, and that was a minute afterward. Started to bleed a little bit, but it held its location fairly well on the toast. Elderberry on the top, cinnamon in the middle, and then just plain creamed honey on the lower portion of that. We know in England that's a preferred way. I've watched some of the people that make it there, and they refer to liquid honey as runny honey, and people don't like runny honey. And most, I think, that they consume is on baked goods. So it's an ideal way to have something to spread consistently on baked goods. We're getting down around to the end here. Yes, I did. And that piece is no longer available. Got some coffee, went real well. And I think it's something, if you haven't tried it, you can do this. I mean, virtually, you're not going to have any more money in trying this than what a pound or 2 pounds of creamed honey cost you. If it's not successful, you can always eat the mistake. It may not be solid, but it'll still taste good. So if you haven't tried it and you're interested, man, I would definitely try that. And what else could you do with it? I've got a lady that I'm going to purchase some Carolina Reaper peppers from. Have to be a little careful with that. So I'll tell you, that cinnamon there in the middle, whew, the flavor intensified. I put too much cinnamon in that. So you got to be a little, I think you'd want to experiment, especially with anything that has a strong flavor. If I do the Carolina Reaper peppers, it's going to be several batches and starting with a small amount and then working my way up. But strawberries, blueberries, the potential is unlimited. And then people that maybe are just on the fence about honey, when you start talking about their favorite fruit now in a honey base, you got extra customers. So I think we're down at the end here. Are there any questions or any comments? If this would have been a face-to-face, I had enough, we would have whipped out the toaster and a loaf of bread and everybody could have at least tasted what it tasted like.
We had a comment. Russ Dean said, to slow stir any product that requires slow stirring here on the farm, I built a rotisserie mixer. And he also commented the British call creamed honey a set honey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, soft set. And hey, it's good. It's a different product group. For my personal consumption, like I say, other than if I'm eating it on food, I would prefer to have the creamed honey. Now, if I'm putting it in ice cream or if I've got a little bit of a cough, probably not. Somebody said, do you prefer powder to the oil flavor? I'll tell you why I like the powder. And some of the images, even on the internet, the folks that was selling infused honey, you could see bands or layers. It just doesn't mix as well. You can't evenly distribute it. I guess that would be the big thing. The infusing honey is another process, and to make it successful, you're having to heat the honey. And so, I'd like to think that we're trying to be as healthy with the honey. I mean, guys, we especially the small beekeepers, I mean, we take pride in, we have raw honey. We're teaching our consumers the benefits of it versus the unknown of the store brands. So if you try this, the dice method's easy to look up. The raw method works just as well as long as you factor in you need to keep that moisture level 17% or so. Have I ever done cold infused and strained the herbs out? No, I haven't. I would like to taste it. Another comment is Carolina Reaper sounds interesting. Yeah, I think that's a good description. I'm definitely going to go slow when I add that in there. This person grinds it and then mixes it with grinding. So that sounds good too. The potential is, whatever your favorite flavor is, you just have to figure out. The nice thing with creamed honey is it is thick enough when you start to pour it that you can pretty well keep whatever you want suspended in it till it finishes setting. Are there any health department rules on putting the flavors added to the honey? I'm not sure about that. If I'm processing some of the fruit to put in the food, there are going to be, just like any commercial kitchen. Now, if you're already buying it processed, already freeze dried, I wouldn't think so. I will not sell this year. I will next year, and I'll have you the exact answer because I'll have the Department of Ag to tell me that. But again, big concern would be fermentation, right? I don't want to put a product out there that has fermented, and the potential with fruit, if you're not real careful, if it has any additional moisture in it, that could be a concern. That's the beauty of the freeze drying, right? Freeze drying removes all of the moisture in it. So all I have is just the dry powder of whatever the fruit was. Any other questions? I can't tell you what it tastes like, right? It's wonderful. Elderberry is a completely different flavor. I've had the elderberry syrup, and the elderberry creamed honey was a different flavor. And I guess that was just because there was a lot of smooth honey mixed in with it. So I was a little surprised. I liked it. I was a little surprised at the taste of that. All right, we're at quarter till.
Any more questions? There is one here. Can you create your own starter with crystallized honey?
Yes, you can, Jean. And when I come down next week, we'll talk about why you don't want to do it. You would actually let your honey crystallize, a small amount of it. You just let it crystallize into those real big, grainy, unpleasant grains, but you want it to completely crystallize. And then you're going to, most people that are going to do that are going to take a, what is it called? Mortise and pestle.
Mm-hmm. A mortar and pestle.
Mortar and pestle.
Mortar and pestle.
And you're going to put that down, and you're going to grind and grind and grind and mash it until you think you've turned it into butter, that consistency. And then there's your starter. You could do that. I could imagine, because here's the problem. If you do that, let's say in a pound or even in a half a pound, and you work for 3 hours to get it perfect, and there's 5 big grains you didn't get, guess what gets replicated in your creamed honey? Those big grains are going to be popping up everywhere. So yes, you can. If you didn't have access to it, or if you wanted to try it, I mean, I've heard people say they like their consistency better. If I went to all the work of doing that myself, I would definitely convince everybody that mine was the best that there ever was. Talking about stirring the first day, 1 hour, is that? No, so what I did was I stirred it for about 10 minutes out of every hour for 4 times in a row for 4 hours. So it's like I did it about 8 that morning. Every hour I'd stir it for 10 minutes up to about noon, and then I stirred it 2 or 3 more times total in the rest of the first day. And then day 2, I only did it 4 or 5 times. Because I could tell that it was evenly distributed. You do have to watch on the bottom. The little clumps of your starter will settle to the bottom. So you'll think, hey, that's pretty consistent looking. I'll go down the bottom, and kind of stir off the bottom, see if anything comes up, and then, there comes a couple pieces the size of a peanut shell. So you can't overmix it as long as you don't incorporate air into it. But you can definitely undermix it. Hey guys, thanks for coming to the class. I want to thank the WVBA again for providing this forum for us to at least have information sent out. I mean, it's always so much more fun when we can be face to face and share what we've done with our families since we last got together. But thankfully, we have this. I think, and I'm on very low bandwidth of internet. So I've been surprised at how well this is operated. And I think we've got another one tomorrow night and again on Friday night.
That's correct. We just have a reschedule for tomorrow night. Just one class, the chapstick making class that we were supposed to have on Saturday. We had to reschedule it. And then Friday we offer 4 new classes as well. Yeah, so if you can, man, that's a great way to invite friends over, right? Tell them to come over and have dinner with you, or better yet, go to their house, invite yourself and say, well, I'll bring the entertainment and take your laptop with you. And maybe you can encourage some folks to become beekeepers that, really didn't know anything about it and probably wouldn't have put the energy to go to a conference or a meeting. All right. Thanks again, everybody. Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Bye now.
Goodbye.